Hello and welcome to an episode of the Growing Pains podcast, where I'm delighted to be joined by Dom Hawes today, who, following a distinguished career in the agency acquisition model, is setting up his own thing, Hunter Hawes. So we're delighted to have him on today and hear a little bit more about that. Dom, a very warm welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks, Harry. Thank you for having me on. Very exciting to come talk to you.
Absolute pleasure. And talking of exciting, obviously up and running with the new business. Do you mind talking us through, I guess, that initially and also
Yeah,
the journey up to this point?
yeah, sure. I mean, I forgot how hard the first yards are. It's been a while since I started from scratch again. And in the past, whenever I've done it, I've always had a business partner. This time, I decided I want to do it on my own, and that more than doubles the load. But anyway, so Hunter Hawes is an M&A advisory for creative businesses, creative agencies, and comms agencies, I should say. So PR, marketing, advertising, social, digital, that kind of stuff. I'm really trying to focus in on the sub 5 million revenue side of things. There's loads of people, good businesses catering for people above that, below that level. That's where I was hunting when I was buying. It's a little bit harder to find good quality support. So that's kind of my thing. And I'm doing that internationally, although the UK is my base. So I've got a client, for example, at the moment in Europe who's looking to grow by acquisition. So I'm helping him find some agencies. I've got a London-based client who wants to be bought by a US agency. So I'm active over there trying to find someone to buy him. And I've joined a board advisory scheme in the US for agencies that want to grow programmatically by acquisition, by which they mean they're not acquiring one, they're doing 2, 3 a year for a prolonged period of time. And so I've joined as a board advisor to that scheme. So I'm busy. And how I got here, in 2018, I raised some money, private equity money, through two family offices. And we created a business called Selbey Anderson. We acquired 13 businesses. We consolidated those down to 5. I think at peak, our headcount was probably 230, 250. I never really measured headcount as a measure of success, but we were doing about 25 million in fees, something like that at peak. And we grew that really quickly. So the growth period of that was 3 years. So from 0 to 25 in 3. And then we spent some time consolidating when the market changed a little bit. And that business is still going strong. And in fact, I'm talking to you from one of their offices today. So we're all good friends still. And so on we go.
That's very nice to hear indeed. And I guess for you, stepping out of that sort of doing it at scale and now working with lots of different businesses who are trying to achieve the same things, are there any kind of core fundamentals that you see as being really important to having a winning acquisition strategy, or is it a little bit all over the place depending on the business?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there are actually. I mean, it's very different, obviously, when you leave a bigger organization, particularly one where you've tested your own processes and everything a lot. A lot just happens because you've set up systems and processes and you've got teammates and all that kind of stuff. So from a personal point of view, I've had to revisit how I do things because I've only got a finite amount of hours. And part of that is in exactly what you're talking about. So in fact, just yesterday I was on the call to an agency that want to acquire, and they were saying, like, what are your 2 bits of advice? What 2 things would you say to an agency who wants to do this? The first thing I'd say is I wouldn't even try to acquire until your own business model is working. And that may sound really obvious, but I've worked with agencies in the past where they see acquiring another business as a way to solve their own business model problems. Now, there are certain circumstances where that might work. There are certain circumstances, so nothing's black and white. But generally speaking, you need a solid platform if you're going to acquire, because the assumption is you're going to bring something into you. So unless it's a specific operating method or a volume, I would say first thing is make sure you are healthy and that you've created a proper platform on which you can acquire. I can go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. And the second thing I think is really to have a very, very clear view on why you are doing it. Because if you don't know why you're doing it, and there are 2 reasons really that people acquire. They're looking for capacity. They want to bring in more of what they currently do because they're trying to build market share, or they're building capability, i.e. they don't do that thing and they want to do it. Therefore, rather than building it, they're going to buy it to speed entry to market. So be really clear on why you're doing what you're doing, and make sure you've got a platform. And then I don't know whether you want me to dig into the platform now or whether we're going to dig in a little bit later, but I'm just going to mention one thing about a platform. The key thing is the principle of the business. If you're leading it, is you're going to need a lot of time. You're going to be able to find some time. Now, you can work with an external originator and an external M&A provider to help you find businesses. And if you don't have the time, that might be your only route. But either way, it's going to sap a lot of your time because you're going to want to dig deep and analyze and understand and meet and, really get to know the business before you commit to buy them. I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of time it takes to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We will jump into the platform. So the one question I was going to just ask about what you're saying there is, what for you, when you're brought in, would you say the signs are that people have got their own business model right before they start to then go into that acquisition?
So I'm just launching out with a whole campaign based on this. It's for me a healthy agency, and it's not just agencies; it works across many different business categories. There are 3 different systems that I want to see in place. So when I was buying, I had a criteria set of maybe 40 different dimensions that I would look at a business to understand what it was and basically to grade my risk in acquiring it. And I've grouped those 40 dimensions into 3 systems, and they are growth, operations, and management. So, and I would want to see that an agency has an I say understanding is not the right word. I want to see that they've got a system in place for those. So a growth system, i.e. if you are not growing organically yourself, if you're plateauing or declining, I want to understand why you think an acquisition might reverse that, because organic growth should not be beyond the capabilities of any agency. So I want to understand why that was not happening. On the operations side, you're going to bring a bunch of new people in quite quickly. So you're going to need to have your own playbooks and processes, workflows, whatever you call them, pretty well tied down. And in an ideal world, you're on top of your data. So you understand exactly what the numbers look like behind the work that you do, and you can produce consistent results for your clients and that you're optimizing your operations. And on the management side, that you have a well enough developed team that they're pretty much running the business for you day to day. So you can go into build mode rather than run mode. So as long as you've got those 3 systems in place, and it doesn't need to be following my system, or you could follow the EOS, or there are loads of different systems out there for business owners and entrepreneurs to run. But I'd want to see that someone has a system and therefore can cope with the additional volume that's going to arrive the day that the transaction closes.
And so then get to that point, and now we're bringing you in. What is the basis of the platform?
Okay, so you need a really good number 2 who's going to run the business day to day, or it could be a leadership team. It depends on your own organizational design, right? So you need a really good, let's start with people. You need a really good number 2 who can run the business day to day, freeing you up to devote yourself to the acquisition. Even if you bring someone else in to help you, this is not something that you want to treat lightly, because just the economics around an acquisition, whatever happens, whether you're deploying your own cash or whether you're bringing debt in or whether you've got an equity investor or whether you're using vendor finance, whatever finance mechanism you're using to bring it in, it's likely to be the single biggest transaction you're going to do in 3 years. And if it goes wrong, you stand to lose more than your name. So it's really important you carve out the time. You can only do that by getting someone else to step up. And it doesn't matter necessarily whether that's someone who's operational or financial or commercial. A lot of agencies like commercial directors, operation directors, finance directors, you want somebody who can help you run those things day to day. So before you get into the process, you probably want to think about, if you haven't already, getting some of your decision-making authority delegated out to other people. That's number 1. Number 2 is, you probably want to ensure that you are profitable consistently, i.e. you're not in profit one month and lost the other, in profit one month and lost the other. If you are experiencing volatile conditions, you don't have a platform. So to me, a platform is, a stable financial. We can more or less predict what our revenues are going to look like, plus or minus 5%. We can more or less tell what our free cash flow is going to look like. We can more or less understand where our clients are and how solid we are with our clients. We've got a good team of advisors around us. You're going to need an accountant and you're going to need a lawyer. Ideally, you've negotiated a fixed price transaction with them. I'm seeing now that certainly on the legal side, you may have a fixed price which is discounted if you don't complete, and you pay a bonus if you do complete, but that allows you to manage upside and downside. So the platform is having the workload, the finances, the support, and the people all in place around you, so you can dedicate yourself, let's say 80% to the transaction. You're still going to have to keep a hand in the business, obviously, because it's still the business you're running. But I don't know, maybe listeners write in if you disagree. It may be that listeners disagree and think, oh no, that's fine. I can acquire in the evening and work in the daytime. I haven't seen that work. I think if you're the target, if someone's coming to acquire you, you need to be pretty clear that you're not going to be able to do your job for between 3 and 6 months. And it's really common to see businesses either falter during due diligence or immediately post-acquisition, they take a dip because the owner of the business who's selling hasn't carved out enough of their own time to see the transaction through. Really common.
Interesting. And it's sort of sticking with people, I guess, for the moment. How do you engage people through that process? So through acquisition, through the sort of potential growth that is required, various obviously different stipulations with new management coming in potentially. What have you seen that works?
Well, I mean, again, every transaction is slightly different because people have different cultures. And so some of the agencies that I bought, the whole team would know that they were in a transaction. Others, they wouldn't find out until after it was done. So I think a lot depends on the culture. My preference is actually to be really transparent and open because, unless the company buying you are shysters, in which case you shouldn't allow yourself to be bought by them. It should probably be seen as a positive thing, an acquisition, particularly if you're joining a platform. So if you're being bought by a competitor who's going to go around and put red labels on the back of everyone's chair so they know who to fire, that's a different thing, right? But I don't think a lot of that happens anymore. But if you're joining a platform, then there should be more opportunity and new clients and new colleagues and all that kind of stuff. So you definitely need to keep the vendor engaged. And that means very frequent communication. And I think a common mistake that's made is when you engage lawyers, you think, well, that's fine. The lawyers will speak to the lawyers. You have to keep an engagement, a direct engagement going with the principles of the deal, because whatever you think is going to happen is not. It's going to go wrong. And you're the only two people that can sort it out. I don't think I've done a deal where it didn't go wrong at some stage and there wasn't like a fraught call between me and the other side, principal to principal, to say, right, okay, let's let the lawyers fight over there. How are we actually going to sort this problem out? So I think, and then, engage through the process, I think is about regular updates. So understanding the project plan and making sure that everyone understands exactly where you are in it. I think the biggest risk for me comes through in due diligence, which could go on and on. It feels like the deal might lose momentum. But so once you're into it and you've gone exclusive, you just want to get it done. But yeah, so it's like everything else. Engagement is about regular communication, being very clear and transparent on what it is you're trying to achieve, and reminding people regularly why you're going to all this trouble.
And you mentioned culture there. In your experience of having built it up as a group, did you try to weave common threads between the culture, bring certain things together, or leave everybody to do their own thing?
It's really hard. Depends what you're trying to build. I mean, I think anytime you consciously try and impact culture, you tell me, actually, it's probably more your expertise than mine. Certainly, maybe I should have worked with you then. The last time I did it, we let them keep their own cultures. It was very important to us that their units felt like their units did before we bought them. We were bringing them together for different reasons. If you're building a single brand, as a lot have. So a lot of the PE-backed platforms that were in the same space as us were building single brands, and they did integrate multiple cultures to varying different degrees of success. And I won't necessarily criticize them, but some of them are reasonably well known not to have worked very well in the early days, those integrations. And some of them I think have worked well. I think the cultural thing is really hard because people get precious about it. So my view was, you've got to focus on what you've got in common, not what the differences are. And there are some things that are table stakes, like operating procedures, how you get things done shouldn't be impacted by culture necessarily. They might have an impact on, like, your management system, your organizational design, your decision making authorities, those sorts of things. But if the culture is focused on how you create value for your clients and how your relationships work and how you relate to each other and what it feels like to be in the building, you should be able to make some changes to the operations system without impacting culture. I say should because, I've tried and I've had enormous resistance to it. I mean, it's a really difficult thing to, like, you'd think it would be really easy to say to someone, we want you to change slightly how you produce your month-end accounts and who produces them. It's like almost put them on a warpath on a couple of occasions. So it's some of the things that you think are really simple are not going to be simple. So it's, it, it's best to talk about those things before you complete and be absolutely clear on what is going to stay as it was and what is going to change. I think the culture thing is really hard. I mean, that's why culture change is it's a specialist area, right? It's not for idiots like me to do that. I do deals. I don't do culture change. I've tried.
Yeah. There are different ways to do it. So I guess within that as well, you've got the leadership, and I always think this is slightly like the Premier League managers of, are you a coach or are you actually the manager? How much are you driving the bus? How important is it that the leaders of the individual businesses feel like they really do have kind of autonomy to run them?
Again, it depends on your org design and what you're trying to build. If you're building a diversified group, it's really important. And I think at that stage, it's not about them feeling like they have autonomy. They actually have to have it. So your organizational design is by nature going to be very much more decentralized. And, I'm a big believer in that. So prior to starting the last business, I was really taken with how the transformation works in technology, where to get that, the DevOps revolution, decision-making was really decentralized, as close to the customer as possible. In principle, who would disagree that decisions should be made as close to the customer as possible? In practice, it's quite hard to deliver that, particularly as you scale. And if you bring in institutional money or external money, because people want to see financial controls, and traditional financial controls are hierarchical, they're not autonomous. There are ways around it, but they're quite hard to put in place. So for me, it depends on, if you're building one brand, then by nature, you're going to have some kind of a hierarchy, and by nature, you're going to have some rules. I generally, as long as you've got stuff that sees deviance, that can uncover the deviance, and there are, unfortunately, people in the world who are not straightforward and honest. So you need to be able to cater for them, but not everybody else should pay the price because some people are dishonest. So I think it's possible to design systems that genuinely do give your unit leaders, whether they're running an agency or running a department, give them genuine autonomy. I also happen to believe that a lot of people are a lot better than we allow them to be. We put these restrictions around people and then complain that they're not using initiative. It's like, well, no shit, Sherlock. Just free people to be who they are, who they really can be, and they'll get a lot done. So I think, feeling autonomy and is about actually having it and understanding where that works and where that doesn't. I think, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't in different fields. Right? Like if they want to go out and buy a Bentley for themselves using company money, clearly that's not going to work. But not many people would do that. They're more likely to make bad decisions rather than corrupt ones.
And then operating at the area of the market that you're looking at the moment, there'll be quite a lot of businesses where one has been founded by somebody and that founder is looking to kind of lead the acquisition. What is your guidance generally for founders stepping into that? Because that's quite an unusual role. You've had something that you've built, you've been fully in control of building, and then you take on something that somebody else built. And as you say, you've got this clash of cultures, operating systems, even the most sort of basic tech things that are a lot harder than you anticipate. What advice do you give founders to not only let go of what they've built, because you've said, you've got to bring in a number two who is then running the day-to-day to free you up. Firstly, I guess around their role, what that looks like and how they approach the other business, because you almost need to take a minute to say, look, you're not the founder of that business. You might own it now, but it's very different.
Look, I think there are always pivotal moments in a career when you feel like the tide is out and you haven't got anything on, because you're suddenly in an area where you haven't done it before. That's entrepreneurialism, right? So you hold your breath and on you go. So I think the best advice to someone who's going to do this, firstly, is to, you either got to read a lot or listen a lot or watch a lot or learn a lot. So the whole process of M&A and then integration and running a bigger unit is different. And, time spent learning is never wasted. So there are courses you can go on to learn about agency M&A. And I belong to, I'm conflicted here because I belong to one of those programs. Digital Agency Business out of the USA has a cohort-based approach where they take cohorts of agency leaders through a very hands-on course of how to make acquisitions and then integrate them. They also run events. I'm going to Boston at the end of this month to run an M&A boot camp where we're going to take agency owners through how to do the first few stages and get their acquisition programs up and running. So there are resources there that people can learn from. There are a bunch of people out there who are trying to teach entrepreneurs how to buy companies with no money down. I would avoid them like the plague. If it's too good to be true, it normally is. You are going to have to spend some money if you want to acquire. That's just a fact of life. But there's loads of good books as well. And increasingly more and more, actually. When I first started looking into M&A in about 2010, 2011, there were some academic books, but not many from practitioners. There's now loads. And I'll happily send you a list to put on the show notes by the time we go live, if that would help. But there are some really good new books out to learn M&A. So if you think about the process of M&A, assuming you've built yourself a platform that can stand a transaction, you've got the whole origination process and building a pipeline. Well, marketers should be kind of good at that. But you've got the origination process and whittling it down to who you actually want to buy. Then you go into the next stage, which is doing the negotiation, the financial structuring, and all the deal stuff. And once you've got that, you go into your due diligence process, and that's where you're trying to validate a lot of the assumptions that you made. Then once you've closed, you're into integration, and people tend to see that as a staged process. But the integration piece is where you actually realize the value. The rest of it before then is you spending money to buy something. So it's not necessarily straightforward, but anyone can do it as long as you've got money. The integration piece is a much bigger piece of the pie than the rest. And I don't think nearly enough weight is given to what happens on day one. Once you've bought that thing, what happens? How are you going to handle that? And I don't think many people are well trained to handle it. And I don't think that many people are training other people to handle that bit either. The best advice I could give is to find probably a business coach or an advisor, someone who's been through the process. And I say specifically a coach and an advisor, not a consultant, because you're going to have to do it yourself. You don't want to get someone in to come and do it for you, particularly if you're the leader, because, we know first impressions count. On the day when you walk into the office and say, "Welcome to my company," you want to know what you're doing, and you want the people in the room to think, actually, do you know what? I feel safe with this person. This is an exciting thing, not, oh God, here we go again, another idiot. And I've had both. I've experienced both. You can normally tell either by the look on their face or the questions they ask. Because I always used to say, I made a bit of a speech and then I'd say, right, who's got some questions? And if the questions are aggressive, you know you're going to have a difficult integration period. And the reason I say a coach or an advisor is you want someone who you can bounce ideas off, who can point you in the right direction, but allow you to make your own decisions. Because ultimately, no two people are the same and no two acquisitions are the same. So how an individual manages that process of projecting themselves in the new team is going to be different. And that needs like someone who understands you over the long term to help you make decisions on that, not someone you bring in to run a meeting. That's not the best way of doing it.
It's also a really interesting point. It's interesting taking different people's opinions. Well, I think that went well, but actually, if you're just sitting and watching the question, the ones that are really quite aggressive but incredibly in depth about their specific role, i.e., I know you don't know the answer to this question, so I'm going to really put you up on the stand. It's a good way to tell how far you are along the way in terms of getting the process right.
Yeah, I mean, actually, and funny enough, that was, one of them was along those lines. Was like, so you're this guy with the money, you come along, you bought our agency, you don't know what I do, you can't do what I do. What do you think gives you the right to tell me what to do? And it's like, well, okay. And that was literally one of the questions. It was like, and expressed exactly like that by a junior, I might add. To which the answer is that, no, I don't know what you do, and I don't know how to do what you do, but that's fine. That's what a team's made up of. And I'm not going to tell you what to do. That's not changing. Your line management is your line management. So I think a lot of people get very scared that when an acquisition comes, everything is going to change. And my received wisdom is that you change as little as possible in the first few weeks. Like there's some, there are people out there who go, yeah, on day one, make sure you've changed all the branding on the mugs and give everyone, like branded merch with the new company. It's like, that might work somewhere, but it's not going to work in London. Everyone's just going to look at you like you're an idiot. So, I mean, for me, softly always works. Like there are some things you want to get straight onto, like the finance systems and, the mechanical side of the integration you want to get straight onto. But the softer side, the human side, my advice would always be to go softly.
We've talked about the founder from one perspective, i.e. the acquirer, but obviously on the other end of this is often a founder that is exiting. You've talked about getting somebody to help running the business because you're going to spend a lot of time dealing with the actual acquisition process in the first place. What are the other realities for a founder that is exiting that they need to be thinking about well in advance?
Well, if they're exiting, they want to get some tax advice. I mean, right away. And they probably want to get it before they accept the offer because how the deal is structured may have some impact. Certainly if you're thinking about if you've built up a cash position in the business and you want to take the cash out at close, or as much of it as you can, you probably want to get some tax advice. If you're doing really well, you might want to get some advice from a wealth advisor too, so you know what's going to happen with the money once you've pocketed it. I mean, other than that, I guess buy some new golf clubs. Post-transaction, if you're exiting, it depends on how the deal is structured, I think, and then therefore how involved you are. So, of the deals we did, I don't think any one was structured the same way. So I very, very much tried to structure our deals in a way that suited us financially, but also met the needs of the people selling the business. So if somebody genuinely wanted to retire, then I don't want to tie them into an earnout. There may be some deferred payments, but I'm not expecting them to run that necessarily. And a lot of that's going to depend on what they've done in their agency pre-exit. So all of the work they need to do is pre-exit. So, for example, I've got 2 or 3 agencies I'm speaking to at the moment. I'm not engaged by them, but they both have exactly the same situation where they're reaching a certain age and they want to get out of the agency, i.e. stop working in it in 3 years. And they were of the opinion that therefore they need to sell now so they can do an earnout. But having looked at the agents, they're not in a position to sell right now. Or they could, but they're not. I mean, if someone would buy them, they won't realize what they need. But they could dig in for 3 years and actually make the right decisions and build out the 3 systems that I mentioned earlier and build themselves a proper platform like we were discussing earlier with a properly structured team. And the key thing then is like a year to a year and a half before their transaction starts, they've got to appoint an MD and they've got to move into a non-exec role, either as a founder or as a, I don't know, call themselves vice president, whatever they want to call themselves. But the most important thing is they're not running the business day to day. And it's not about the job title. It's about the actual behaviors. You let that person run the business, make yourself arm's length. And then when you sell, you're no longer needed. So you may still have to finance the transaction, but you're not working in it day to day. So with those, each of those agencies, I've advised the same thing, which is we'll get you on a 3-year program. At a certain point in time, you need to make yourself effectively a non-executive of that business. And then you let your MD take it into the transaction. They run the process and you sit back as an advisor. You can then decide if you want to stay on as an advisor on a day a month or whether you want to walk away. But you need to get yourself out of the day-to-day. And that if you're not out of the day-to-day and you come in to sell, don't think about leaving after day one. And no one will pay you. It's too risky. I don't know anyone that does transactions like that. If you want to stay on, now that's a totally different thing. So, a lot of people want to sell because they want to join a bigger platform. They want to join something bigger, or, they feel like they've reached a ceiling that they don't know how to get through. And some of the best acquisitions I've made are where you've got slightly younger, really ambitious leaders who want to carry on. That's a totally different thing, right? That is totally different. The challenge there as the acquirer is making sure that you've got enough headroom for that person to grow. Because if you're bringing a bunch of people in like that, from a Machiavellian point of view, it might be fun to pit them against each other to see who's the toughest. But actually, if you've got a bunch of really talented people, you might want to bring them all on. Like, how are you going to create headroom to do that unless you're really growing at sting? So, and if you're going into a transaction like that, where you've been growing well, but you're joining a bigger platform, again, I would probably, you'd already have a good team behind you. Otherwise you wouldn't be succeeding. But I would make an important part of the negotiation, whether you own the shares or someone else owns the shares, like, what's my role post? What's my package going to be post? Because you're going to have to fit into their remuneration policies, not yours, right? So there's a load of things you might want to just think about. But if you're joining a platform because you want to grow, you've got to make sure there's growth for you when you do join. It's really obvious, but not a lot of people think that far ahead.
Very good advice. Now, we've elicited a lot of advice for you, and you touched at the beginning on the size and sort of type of business. But do you want to just spend a little bit of time just outlining what your ideal client is and who it is you are really helping at the moment, so they know where to find you?
Yeah, that's very kind. Thank you. Yes, free ad for me. Woohoo! Ideally UK-based, probably UK-based. Agency that wants to buy or sell. If they're selling, then they're probably, as I said, up to 5 million in revenue. So they're probably a team of 30 to 50, 25 to 50. I do work with agencies a lot smaller than that. I have some models specifically developed for like 10, 15, 20 person agencies that may feel like running a process is beyond their reach. Sector, actually, honestly, it doesn't really matter much as long as it's a people-based business, where the people are the assets. So consultancies work just as well as agencies. This process works just as well. I'm seeing a lot of agencies, particularly with vibe coding now, thinking that the platform they've coded is worth 20 times their revenue. So we need to disavow people of that opinion. Product and service are very different. They don't mix well necessarily. It's oil and water. It can be done. But I prefer, everyone uses AI, that's fine. But if you've built a product and it isn't running in its own right, there's probably value less. But ideally, good, solid, stable platform. I don't mind if they're growing or not, actually. I give practical and real advice. Not everyone likes it. But if I don't think your agency is saleable, I'll tell you. And I'll tell you what I think it's saleable at. You might not like that number, but that's where I see the the reality. There are a bunch of people in the market. It's a bit like a state agency, um, who will give a price in order to win a bid. I would never do that because I'm only interested in working with people who I can actually transact with, I think. So it does mean I tell the unvarnished truth. So that's on the sell side. On the buy side, actually, anyone that wants to make an acquisition, that wants some help, either running an origination process from start to finish, or if they want, a bit of advice. And then on the advisory side, if you don't want to exit yet, I have a growth system workshop that I've been running with agencies. That's working really well. That's how to get an agency that's stagnating back on a growth trajectory. And then the operations system is run as a consulting project, and the management system is much more likely to be run as a coaching process, but not by me, by affiliates. I'm not a coach. I'm a deal hunter. So if you want to get a deal done, I'm the kind of person that finds one for you.
Fantastic. Well, on the basis of the advice you've provided today, I think those finite hours you mentioned are looking to be pretty full at this stage. But
Yeah, they are.
yeah, the only shame is there's only one of you. But thank you very, very much for your time today. It's been great to speak to you,
Harry. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to blather on and on. But if it's you can find me on LinkedIn, everybody, if you want to find any more information.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dom.
Cheers, Harry. Thanks a lot.